Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Ace on Music. I am joined, as always, by my producer, Mark, and we have a special guest this week, Seth Berg. This week, we're going to talk a little bit about music publishing. And it's one of the questions that comes up to me the most out of any emerging artist is one of the parts of the music industry that they understand the least is the idea of music publishing. So Seth here is somebody who spent a lot of years working in that field, and Mark is a lawyer who has dealt a lot with the music industry in his past. So I thought this might be a great time for the three of us to discuss this as sort of a primer for those out there who don't really understand music publishing and what it is. So let's start with the big question. What exactly is music publishing?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, music publishing is the administration of the written part of your musical composition, the written and the instrumentation. So you would want to copyright and trademark that and have somebody administer that and make sure it's properly monetized. It's actually one of the very few parts of the entertainment business that's strictly regulated by federal law. So it is something that you want to take advantage of through, making sure you can capitalize on performance royalties and things like that we can get into a little bit later.
So is there a difference between the publishing of the musical aspect of a song as opposed to the lyrics aspect of the song?
Well, it depends on how that was split up. Sometimes there's a writer of the lyrics and a composer of the instrumentation. Certainly, there's plenty of examples out there from Elton John and Paul McCartney who might have split up certain aspects of that, and then those writing partners would decide how they want to split that composition.
But for the purposes of music publishing, the words and lyrics make one complete body and are both covered by this concept.
Correct. And the publisher would ask you if you both came together. If you're a lyricist and you're writing music, they would want you to come together. You might be paid separately.
Right.
You might get your own royalty streams out of that, but it would be one composition represented.
So what happens then? Let's say that I'm a television producer and I'm making a TV show and I really want to I'm going to take a page out of the catalog of your clients. Let's say I want to use a Dean Martin song in my TV show. How do I go about doing that? And how does that lay out how that kind of a deal would work?
Well, that's a combination of a master recording and then the publishing of the song. For somebody like Dean Martin, he didn't write songs. So there's actually two components and probably two separate parts of the company, two separate companies that you would need to deal with.
Okay.
So Dean Martin would have been a recording artist that would have signed exclusively with a record label who would have made records and distributed those records and owned his voice in those albums and the copyrights to those albums. And there was someone that wrote the song for Dean, and that's another company that would get paid a royalty from the record company to be on that record. So a producer of a television show would come to you, and they would go to the record label, and they would do a license agreement, a master license agreement for Dean Martin's recording, and then they would approach the music publisher for a synchronization license to get the copyright to the lyrics.
A synchronization license, or a sync license for short, so that would be the deal that actually allows me to use that music in my
That's correct. It's giving you the right as the producer to sync my copyright to your copyright to create a new copyright.
Now, how much control do you have over what I do with that song in my show?
Me as the artist, or me as the owner of the copyright?
You as the owner of the copyright.
Well, yeah, I would want to know a lot of different things. How's the music being used? How are you distributing this project? Who's involved in this project? How much money do you have for this project? Are you using me in the opening credits? Are you using me as the third song at the last credits? Am I over a montage? Does somebody sing along to the song? Are you going to change the lyrics? There's a whole host of questions that you would want to know.
If I went to you and say I wanted to use a song that one of your artists had actually written, an iconic song of, say it was, did Nat King Cole write Unforgettable?
No, he did not write Unforgettable.
Okay.
He wrote songs, but they were in his salad days, so they're not terribly big in pop culture.
Okay,
but
well,
Peggy Lee is a great example.
Okay,
she
Peggy
wrote
Lee.
It's a Good Day.
Great one. It's a Good Day from Peggy Lee. Let's say that I wanted to use that song, but I wanted the lead actress in my show to sing it.
Right.
Does that end up affecting what it costs me to rent that from you?
It could. Depends on who's doing it. Depends on how it's being done. Are they satiring it? What is the budget of the music? How badly do you want them to use it?
So are you saying that when you do one of these sync deals that if let's say I wanted let's change that scenario slightly and say I wanted to use Peggy Lee's actual recording of
Mm-hmm.
that song. So what I'm getting from you here is that it's actually almost like two halves of the same coin.
Correct.
You have the amount of money that goes to the person who wrote the song and the amount of money that goes to the person who actually performed the version that you're using.
Correct.
So in this case, she would get both halves, but it's possible that it could be two different
It
artists.
could be two separate people completely. Somebody like Frank Sinatra wasn't a songwriter, so Frank Sinatra would not participate in the publisher's share of any deal that was done.
Now, I've also heard that, especially back in the earlier parts of the music industry, that some artists who were on that level of a Dean Martin, and I'm not saying that they did it, but I know that, especially with a lot of black artists and things like that, where the publishers ended up getting some or a large chunk of the publishing out from under them. And so, in a case like that, and I don't know if you have any experience with this, but let's say that the label ended up keeping half of the publishing due to whatever deal they made back in the day, and you now get a sync deal for that thing. Does that mean that the label could kibosh the sync because they own half of the publishing, or is it still
Whoever owns it and whatever the contract says, they probably could. Usually people don't kibosh those things, but
Right.
yes, they probably could. And usually those deals weren't the record label that did it was the artist that did it.
Yes.
That's how Elvis Presley ended up writing a lot of songs, because the Colonel put him on
Right.
as a writer. Elvis was not a writer.
But it continues to get royalties to this day.
Correct. Dick Clark was sort of famous for that. You got played on Bandstand. As a matter of fact, there were some payola accusations against him. He didn't get hit with them because they went after Alan Freed, and Bandstand was just too big. But there were a lot of issues that were floating around that, Dick Clark did not write songs, but Dick Clark owns a lot of publishing.
Now, Mark, you come from a law background. You've dealt in the music industry for years. What, if any, interaction did you have on the music publishing side of things?
Well, I worked with smaller artists, and so the guys that were fighting the fight to try to get their music played, and they were showing up at networking functions, and they were trying to meet the music supervisors, and also probably were not getting a big share of the statistical allocation from the performing rights societies, and had no other power to enforce. And so they're coming from a position of weakness, and I think that may be the disparity that happens when we start talking about artists that actually are being recorded as a statistically meaningful participant in performing rights royalties, and royalties, versus the people who are fighting for radio time and actually aren't being picked up. And I think that's the fight, and that's where the part of the market where I was largely sitting.
And by the way, even the famous artists still fight for their allocation of the performance rights.
Yeah,
absolutely,
That's for sure.
Absolutely.
That's why CSAC exists, because...
Well, I mean,
Do you want to explain that to people? Do they understand what the performing rights societies are?
well, yeah, it's something that we should explain.
It's part of publishing.
It's part of publishing. Since you're the guest,
Oh,
explain
me.
what a
Okay.
publishing company
Mark,
is.
jump in here if I get this wrong. But the performing rights societies are basically performance rights organizations that go out and enforce payment in the public performance of your music. So when you when you go into a bar and there's a live venue, that bar pays an ASCAP or a BMI license to have that music played. If you go into a gym that has music piped through their speakers, they're paying to play that music. Those artists that are paid, that money then goes into a big pot, which then gets allocated based on the popularity of the song, not the actual plays of the song. And that's mandated by federal copyright law, I think back in the early 20th century, if I recall correctly. Mm-hmm. And the big societies are ASCAP, the American Association of Performers, Composers, something like that, and Publishers, and then BMI, and then CSAC, which was started primarily when what was it, karaoke came around because somebody like Neil Diamond was saying, I'm not being paid properly. I'm being sung in every bar that has karaoke, and I'm not seeing it in my check. So him and a bunch of other people, I think Tom Petty and a few other people, went and started CSAC.
Well, I mean, it makes sense. I mean, I mean, the other thing that we do in the live avenue is that when one of my bands plays a venue, I need to fill out forms that
Correct.
show what songs we were playing, who wrote those songs, so that the people get. I know in the UK we have there's one called PRS
Correct.
that does
Performing Rights Societies.
right, and so those are important ones to know as well. But as far as now, that's for the performing rights,
Correct. That's separate from your publisher, but you
right?
should make sure if you're going to be a writer and you're writing your own songs and you're going to take the time to seek out a publishing deal, you should absolutely have your songs registered with one of the performing rights societies, and globally if you're a global artist.
So what exactly is a publishing deal then?
Well, publishing deal is the side of the business that represents the written lyrics and the instrument, the musical part of your work.
So if I sign a publishing deal with for one of my songs with a label, do they then go out? What do they do with my song, or do I collect the money from them? Do I have an agent that collects it from them? How does that
Yeah,
all work?
you would have they would pay you a royalty stream. So if you had a record label deal and a publishing label deal, you'd have two separate companies that would work for you. Usually if you're starting out now, they're one company that
Yeah.
represents both sides. But let's just say for the sake of old school that it's two separate companies. One company you would talk with, the publishing company might say, "Are you interested in other people covering your material?" Sometimes that happens. Are you not interested in people covering your material? Someone like Dolly Parton, some of her biggest hits were covered by other people, yet she's known as a singer-songwriter. So if you're interested in that, then they would go out and pursue covers of your music. If you just want to be a writer, you have no interest in performing, then they'll go out and they'll try to find people to match you up with, performers, producers, things like that.
So you mentioned covers there for a moment. Like, let's say that one of my clients, for example, is the band Europe, and they had the song "The Final Countdown." Now, just about any band that's playing cover songs in a bar from here to Timbuktu is that focuses on 80s music is going to play "The Final Countdown" in their set.
Mm-hmm.
So, and maybe even some bands may even end up recording a cover of it on their albums or whatever. Are you saying that do I have any say in whether or not they can record that cover?
No.
That's what I thought.
No. Under copyright law, you have the first record option. So if it's never published, you have the right as the owner of that work to decide who actually records it first. Once it's publicly recorded, anybody can record it. That's the reason why people do covers of Beatles songs. You can't use their name and likeness, and you can't use their names unless you use certain legal, Mark can get into that. Statements of fact, but yes, anybody can cover your material. That's the reason why somebody like Weird Al Yankovic can continue going out making parodies of songs that drives artists insane because all he used to do is pay them the statutory rate, and the
Right.
statutory rate's about 10 cents. So you pay 10 cents for every download or every physical CD that's sold. You would pay 10 cents as to the writer of that song.
Right.
So-
Although it is worth mentioning that Weird Al has another exception for how he is proceeding, which is under the parody and satire rules,
Right.
where he actually is not under copyright law. He's under the First Amendment, and he slips in, which is what gives him carte blanche.
Yeah, but he also, but he doesn't even need to go that far because what he would do is pay it if you refuse to give somebody, if you make a stink enough and somebody just pays the mechanical every month as opposed to what normal royalties are paid out twice a year,
Mm-hmm.
royalty statements are paid out. He pays it every month. And
Just-
then it's just a little quirk in the copyright law. He doesn't even need to go to the First Amendment and argue it, although Mark is right.
Wow. So let's say that you compare a couple of songs. You might have a hit song like from the Beatles. Some of their earliest songs only ran a couple of minutes, whatever, as opposed to I don't know something like Inagata Davida or something that goes on for 15. If I am making a sync deal for those, does the length of the song play into it at all?
Oh, sure. How long you're going to use it? Sure. If you're going to use the complete song, usually there's going to be a reason that they're doing that. So you want to see what that reason is.
You see, now another question I had was, and this is a deal that you may or may not have been involved in, might have been done before you were involved, but we were talking before the show about the long-running sitcom Married with Children, which of course had a Frank Sinatra song as their theme song
Right.
for all that whole run. So when they make a deal for using a song like that as the theme song of a show that runs and runs and runs and runs, is there some kind of a deal made because it's used every episode as
Sure.
opposed to a one time in a movie or something? So
Sure,
you're getting
would. Yeah, the production would want to always hedge its bets by saying we'll pay you per episode with a guaranteed amount of episodes because you never know when stuff's going to get pulled off the air or a pandemic hits and no one can go to work anymore. You just never know. So yeah, it's always a per episode, and then they might throw in we have the right to use it in advertising, and you sort of look at all that and you say what kind of money do you have, and then you go from there.
So everything's negotiation.
Everything is a negotiation.
There's no standard fee charts that says, if you have
No.
$1 million budget in your movie, then you're gonna have to pay this much for the
How
song.
bad do you want to be in it?
So, Mark, what are some of your thoughts on this stuff?
Well, I have to say I'm particularly curious about something Seth may have a unique interest or awareness of. By the way, my answer to that is it's a daunting process, and it's a lopsided one. I mean, it is very much in favor of the people that have success, and it's very much against the people who are fighting the fight. And it can be very frustrating, especially in a world of digital and trans, with the models changing so dramatically. And I am definitely curious as to your thoughts on that. But while Ace let me talk, which doesn't happen all the time, I'm also interested in holograms.
That was going to be something I was going to bring up.
And something I know that you have some awareness of.
I do. I've been working on holograms for a very long time.
And I happened to go to a Grammys show where somebody appeared.
Yes.
And I want to know more.
Okay. Well, let me get back to your, thought about your comment about it being a daunting process in publishing.
Yes.
There's no question about that. Most artists are not necessarily good business people. It's just not, and most business people don't necessarily be good artists, or aren't necessarily good artists. It's not a criticism. It just is what it is. You need to find the people at the companies that you're doing business with that will be your champion. And if you don't have the time to do that, you need to get an advocate to do that for you, either a lawyer or an artist manager or a girlfriend or somebody to make those calls and advocate for you, advocate for yourself, and find those people at the companies that are going out and pitching and getting this stuff worked. You won't collect if there's no one interested in collecting for you and working for you. You've got to build those relationships.
Yeah, I mean, I know from my own experience that of any aspect of most artists that I end up taking on as management, the one area that always needs attention is dealing with their publishing. It's always,
Absolutely.
especially when you have these artists who have gone throughout long careers and had multiple labels and
Right.
multiple publishers over the years, it becomes nightmarish to try and track all this stuff down.
Absolutely. And the older your catalog becomes, the industry is still a young industry, so you've got to find somebody that is interested in your genre of music or whatever that, even if you're all young, it might not be someone that's interested in your genre of music. You've got to find those advocates at those companies. And it's also a business of people moving around a lot and companies being bought and sold. So it can be very frustrating. I remember Dean Martin's manager said to us one time, one of the catalog guys started to talk in a meeting, and he said, "I don't need to hear you. You're the 40th person I've listened to that in that job." And it's like, that's a lot of people.
Well, so considering how complex the whole thing is, are there, as you said, advocates that artists can hire that will, how does that all work?
I mean, you showcase your work, you go out and you get management. I've never had to do that. I've never actually gone out and seen artists, but I've certainly get invited to showcases. And then you have to connect with somebody. I mean, that really is what it's all about at the end of the day. It's a marriage. And, it's somebody that you're going to trust to represent you, someone that you're going to trust to potentially oversee some finances or at least direct somebody to spend your money, it can be very nerve-wracking. I mean, don't forget Billy Joel's brother-in-law stole all of his money, so it's
Really?
just not, it's a hard, those are hard decisions to make.
Well, it's always been my experience that, especially when it comes to things like sync deals, the money's coming in from all kinds of places, and
Right.
I don't think that a lot of artists really keep track of it.
Right. Well, in the beginning, you can. I mean, I always tell artists when young people come to me and one advice, I say, you really should do everything in the beginning so you know what you don't know. And if you don't know what you don't know, if you all of a sudden rise to superstar, status, you might be missing stuff that someone's either not collecting on your behalf, stealing on you, mismanaging it, and you might not think it's that important. I mean, this pandemic has been very interesting in a lot of aspects because the people that I deal with at the record labels primarily deal with catalog. They don't deal with live artists on tour. They're not dealing with t-shirt sales. They're not dealing with road managers and things like that. Well, now the whole planet is a catalog. No one is on tour. Every artist is a catalog artist. So now I'm competing with live artists going to the same people that I was going to. And in essence, I'm almost like a new artist because I'm fighting the guys that are actually out there, with gigantic names that can appear on nightly shows and SNL and make a fortune.
Now, you mentioned a moment ago, or Mark mentioned a moment ago, about this new wave of the idea of deceased artists or maybe even living artists being represented as holograms. I know that somebody I know really well, the former wife / manager of Ronnie James Dio, and they've been doing that. And I did see one from Frank Zappa when I was in London about a year ago or a year and a half
There's
ago.
been a Roy Orbison that's had some success overseas that toured.
Maybe in a Neil Diamond one. I can't remember.
Elvis Presley.
Elvis Presley, okay.
It's huge.
So, considering, I know this is kind of off the topic of publishing, but I'm going to drag it back into that. But especially with the stable of artists that you represent, they seem ripe for that sort of thing. Have you considered doing holograms?
Sure, we've considered doing it. I mean, we've done them. We've done a few of them. It's hard. It's very difficult. It can border on creepy for a lot of people. Some people get headaches when how long do you make it? Would somebody really be willing to sit through a 2-hour hologram Beatles concert? I'm not quite so sure. Even the Beatles, and I think that would be tough. There's just a lot of variables to it.
It was also extraordinarily expensive.
It's incredibly expensive.
Yeah,
it's about $350,000 for one song.
Yeah, and that's the kind of numbers that were being thrown at us. We were approached by the one company because we were going to do a Thin Lizzy tour, and there was talk about maybe doing one of the songs with a holographic Phil Lynott. And then we said, well, what kind of money's involved? Well, for you guys, we could do the rendering for about $250.
Right.
And I went, $250? That's not bad. And they went, no, $250,000. And it was like,
no, it's very expensive.
What kind of money do you think? And then the actual cost of staging a holographic show is almost more expensive than putting on a.
No, it's brutal. That's for sure. And that's why a lot of them do more concerts. But some people try to find an actor or somebody that looks like the person, like the Roy Orbison one. They actually found a lookalike of him, so that made that a lot cheaper. The Ronnie Dio one was a complete rendering, so that was very expensive.
Yeah,
and they didn't necessarily. I didn't think they got the eyes 100% right, but it's from a distance, so it worked.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I'm not quite so sure that every marketplace is ready for it. I don't think the United States would go for it. Vegas has never picked it up, and you'd think that's where that would have
tried.
started.
I mean, the Dio one tried touring, and I mean, the costs of putting on a show would require basically, large theaters or small arenas to justify the cost, and they were getting clubs, because that's the kind of interest. It just wasn't there yet.
Right.
So, but
what my experience is, the ones that are successful are the ones where they've remastered all the recordings. So really what you're doing is you're going into a venue to have the hologram in the background you can interact a little bit at a bar, you're sort of hanging around, and you're just listening to the best music on a great sound system. And I think that's why the Roy Orbison was successful. Maria Callas one was incredibly successful, but they did some magic to that, which was very interesting. So they was not necessarily just realistic that she was up there singing. Something like that, I think, could be very, very, very interesting. And I think it just depends on the country. The Japanese seem to like that stuff very much, and the Middle East, it's starting to really burgeon over there.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, dragging it back to publishing. So when I know that at least earlier, I don't think it happens so much anymore. At least none of the contracts I've done in the last little while. But back in the earlier part of the musical industry, a lot of artists end up signing deals that were in perpetuity.
Mm-hmm.
And now I know that there's been some laws, especially in the United States, put in place that say that if you had an in perpetuity deal and your song has reached a certain age, that there is a way for the artist to regain control of that.
You're not in a contract to work with them in perpetuity, but when they pay for the work, they own it in perpetuity.
Right.
And then what you have is there's various stages of copyright law, and Mark, you can jump into this because it gets a little complicated between 72 and 76, I think, where the United States tried to nationalize copyright law, which had before been done on the state level. That's the reason why Elvis Presley is in Nashville. And that's the reason why Elvis Presley Enterprises is based in Nashville, because Tennessee has the strictest copyright laws in the nation because it's the home of Elvis. New York did not have any kind of name and likeness rights or any kind of very strong trademark rights, which is why when Marilyn Monroe died, she was a resident of New York. All of her name and likeness went into the public domain when she died. That's the reason why you saw every picture and every poster put all over the place with her.
Wow, okay.
And so they tried to nationalize that and clean that up. It was a decade-long process. They messed it up in 1972, so they tried again in 74, and they finally fixed it in 76. And there's termination rights that you have as a writer. So after a certain period of time of writing and then time of death. Is that what it is? Do you remember exactly what that time is? You can look it up. But
yes, I don't remember. It was lengthened quite a bit.
It's lengthened quite a bit, and it's something like 50 years after, 75 years after it was written, or 50 years after you're dead, you have the right to terminate it. So you can pull that copyright back.
Interesting.
Or your heirs can.
Is there any other aspects of publishing that you think that an emerging artist should know that it's important to get across from them, right, as a basic educational thing?
Absolutely. I just wouldn't be intimidated by it. I think the key is finding somebody that you trust, somebody that you like. You know, read a couple of books. The Business of Music is a great book. You don't need to know a lot. You just have to surround yourself with people that you trust that can do stuff for you. Even if you're the representative of yourself, the people at that publishing company, you find those people that can go in and help you grow your business and make money, because that's what it's really about at the end of the day. If you're not making money, no one's listening to you. That's just the simple fact of the matter.
Well, thank you very much, Seth, for joining us today and giving us your thoughts on that. And Mark, thank you as always. Always great to have that insight.
Mark.
And I want to thank all of you for your continued support of the show. We really appreciate all that you do, all of your emails, your comments. We read them all, believe me. And if you want to send us an email, you can send it to acetalksmusic@gmail.com. We're also over on the patreon.com platform under patreon.com/ace on music, and that's where you can see our special after-hours show where we talk about the stuff we do after this show. But in the meantime, stay safe, and we'll see you next time.